Good afternoon, all, to our virtual town hall on fair housing, sponsored by the City of Tucson's Housing and Community Development Department. I'm Ernesto Portillo. I'm the Public Community Engagement Officer with HCD. Our panel today is to celebrate, recognize, and advocate for fair and affordable housing. We celebrate the history of the 1968 Fair Housing Act, but we also recognize the continuing challenges we face at the local and national levels. We will engage in this robust discussion with our panel, Tucson Mayor Regina Romero, HC Director Liz Morales, and Jay Young, Director of the Southwest Fair Housing Council. But before we get into our discussion, I have a couple of reminders and requests. As you know, this session is being recorded. We ask that you remain muted during the presentation. We should have some time for some questions and answers at the end of our panel discussion, but please submit your questions via the chat option. We have 2 American Sign Language interpreters. Thank you for joining us, and we will end at 1 o'clock. To set the table for today's discussion, I'd like to share with you a video from District 3 Congressman Raul Grijalva.
Ernesto, the video's not playing. Now we can't hear it, sorry.
So you might have to reshare your screen, and there's like an option at the bottom to share the audio.
Why don't we do introductions if that's okay? Because I know that's part of our agenda here. Neto, if it's okay if we do our introductions while you do that?
And then you're going to share.
Great. Mayor, would you like to do an introduction?
Sure. Thank you so much. I really appreciate being with you all here today. It's an important conversation to have. First, just wanted to acknowledge that today is Earth Day, Arizona Arbor Day, and so it's a wonderful time.
Over 50 years, 54 years to be exact, that the Fair Housing Act passed. Congress, and was signed into law. A huge civil rights and housing equity initiative and law that prohibited discrimination and ensuring that equal opportunity housing was available to all Americans. However, housing issues persist, and across the nation, we continue to experience an incredible shortage of affordable housing. That national shortage is up to 7 million homes that are needed to deal with the crisis in affordable housing. 20% of the renters in Arizona uh, would be classified as extreme low income. Of that 20%, 75% pay more than half of their income toward rent, which causes other stresses for them economically and emotionally for these families, given the other needs that they have, from childcare to healthcare to food to transportation. And the pandemic causes significant harm to renters and to homeowners. And one of the criteria going forward that has to be part of it, and Tucson and Pima County have been at the forefront of that, safe and clean housing. We're promoting in this next spending bill and through legislation and amendments that all affordable housing needs to be safe and clean and necessary for the health and the well-being, free of mold, lead, carcinogens, and any element that would add to bad health outcomes for those families. You know, the efforts by majorities in Congress and the president have been to American Rescue Plan, putting $50 billion into critical housing assistance, including $27 billion for rental assistance and $10 billion for homeowners during the pandemic, and $5 billion in direct homeless assistance. The 22 spending bill, same thing, $4 billion for the housing and urban development issues, dealing with grants, homelessness, and choice vouchers, and expand rental assistance vouchers to up to 25,000 households. And the president's budget for 2023 continues that additional mandatory federal investment in affordable housing. We need to do more. There's no question about it. And what needs to be done is to assure that we have additional money. We've asked for $300 million for runaway and homeless youth, and for the McKinney-Vento to be able to implement and deal with the young people that experience homelessness. An additional $100 million for critical housing assistance and counseling that is very much needed by many of our families. This, in addition to the money we are pushing for CDC to do lead abatement and public health safeguards for families living in affordable housing, and advancing the HUD Inspection Act to ensure that inspections are compliant with federal housing laws and serve to provide a healthy environment and safe households. That's what needs to be done. But we know that the demand exceeds the resources and availability. And as we push forward, we have to make sure that any budget, and that includes the Justice 40 money as well, deals with impacted communities, deals with those most at risk, and deals with under-resourced areas such as housing and affordability as part of a response to communities as a whole. And so we continue to push that. And Pima County and the city of Tucson have been at the forefront and established some important precedents. The cooperative working together of both entities in terms of dealing with the housing issue over particularly the last 2 years during the pandemic, which made everything worse by far. The other thing is the counseling, getting the resources out directly to people, making sure that that's where the greatest impact happened. That has been the record. And I look forward to working with both the city and the county to continue to support those programs, assure a level of resource support from the federal government to keep those programs going, and to continue to use this as an example in other communities of what a collaborative, unified response to the housing crisis and the lack of affordability for families, how that response should be and how concentrated that should be. That's an example Tucson and Pima County have set, and you should be proud of that. So thank you. Look forward to the results of this conference and look forward to working with both the city and the county and communities in addressing the escalating need for affordable housing and the escalating need for transition housing for homeless population and houseless populations across this county and across this city. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman Raul Grijalva, and to his staff for providing us with this video. Introduction of our panelists. Mayor Regina Romero was first elected in November 2019, becoming Tucson's first woman and Latina mayor. Raised by immigrant farm worker parents in Somerton, Regina broke a number of barriers on her way to her current position. Her policy priorities include community safety, health and wellness, housing affordability, transportation and mobility, climate action, and economic development, among others. Mayor Romero is co-chair of Mayors Against Illegal Guns and inaugural member of the Mayors Alliance to End Hunger. She's also a member of the Climate Mayors Network. She has a Bachelor's of Arts degree from the University of Arizona, postgraduate certificate from the Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. She's a proud mama of 2 bilingual, bicultural, bi-adorable children, and has been married to Ruben Reyes for 18 years. And she is also a proud mariachi mom. Mayor Romero, welcome. You're on mute.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Ernesto. We were trying to take advantage of the technical difficulties to start off the conversation, but I just wanted to say to everyone and to you, thank you for putting this conversation together. Really important conversation to have. But happy Earth Day, everyone. Today's Earth Day and our day, and you know, I think many things layer and everything is interconnected and holistic. And when it comes to housing affordability and climate change and poverty and even educational opportunity, many of these things connect to each other. And the front lines always of these society's ills, front lines are always children, seniors, low-income communities, Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. And so we cannot move away from having to confront the inequities that have been created in the past that are in full display, especially as the congressman said, the past 2 years, the pandemic has highlighted these inequities, and housing affordability is front and center when it comes to inequities in throughout the country, but here in our community, we see it with our own eyes. So thank you, Ernesto, for the introduction, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Mayor, and I do apologize for the technical difficulties. I'm far removed from being a millennial, trust me. Director Liz Morales has been with Housing and Community Development. In her role, she manages programs under Housing Choice Voucher and Community Planning and Development with the purpose of further enhancing community development. Before her current role, Director Morales was the Director of Housing and Community Development for the City of Mesa. She also served as Housing Choice Voucher Manager for the City of Phoenix for 6 years. Her duties included administering the Housing Choice Voucher Program and coordinating the city's initiative to eliminate veterans' homelessness in addition to chronic homelessness. For 8 years, she has worked for the Arizona Behavioral Health Corporation as a housing administrator, assisting more than 1,200 homeless individuals and families with housing subsidies for private rental units scattered throughout Maricopa County. She also served as a housing specialist from 1996 to 2001. She serves on several boards, including the Salvation Army, the Arizona chapter of the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, and Arizona Behavioral Health Corporation Board of Directors. She has a Bachelor of Science in Business Management and a Master's in Counseling. She's a first-generation Cubana Americana. Liz and her husband, Mark, have 2 adult children, Vanessa and Daniel. Welcome, Director Morales, to the discussion today.
And I have to update that bio to say one granddaughter who's 4 months old. So
Yay.
that's my favorite thing to share now. So thank you, Neto. I also want to echo what the mayor said and appreciate your appreciation for you and Rachel and all the work you did to get this town hall shared with everyone. I have to thank Mayor Romero for her leadership. She is the strongest elected official who really advocates for housing, addressing our houseless issues. And so it's a sincere pleasure, Mayor Romero, to have you here. And then I just want to thank Jay Young, who serves on our Commission on Equitable Housing and Development, and is such a strong advocate on this issue and is the premier expert, in my opinion, here in Arizona around fair housing. So happy to have this great group and to be part of the panel. You know, one of the things as the department director, you know, we operate, as you mentioned, Ernesto, Section 8 program with 5,500 households, working with landlords every day. But we're also landlords ourselves. We operate and administer housing for over 1,500 households in public housing, another 400 households of affordable housing. And it's important that of all landlords that we understand how to be the best landlords and be responsive to needs and issues around fair housing. And that's something we strive for. We're severely imperfect at times, but making sure we're held accountable for those things are really important. You know, housing is many things. One is healthcare. When people have safe, stable housing, they can ensure that their health is better. There's no stress, you know, the stress of trying to have housing creates a lot of health issues. And housing also can be around wealth building. People over the generations who've been able to purchase homes and pass those down to their children have been able to create wealth. Not everyone in this country over the history has been able to do that because of lack of fair housing practices. And we know that housing stability is incredibly important, especially for children. And we know that it allows them to have better educational outcomes when they have stable housing. So fair housing breaks down those barriers so that people can have access and healthcare and stability and better educational outcomes. And that's why we're here today, to make sure we raise that awareness.
Thank you, Director Morales. To our third panelist, Jay Young. Jay is the Executive Director of the Southwest Fair Housing Council. He's a passionate civil rights advocate. He co-authored 5 analyses of impediments to fair housing choice: The American Nightmare, Foreclosures and Their Impact in Metropolitan Tucson, and the Northeastern Arizona Fair Housing and Equity Assessment. He served on the Grant Road Citizens Task Force for nearly 8 years. Currently, Jay serves on the City of Tucson Planning Commission, the City of Tucson Commission on Equitable Housing and Development, and the Southern Arizona Prosperity Alliance and the National Fair Housing Alliance Board. He served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Honduras, where a library bears his name. There's a story there. He drove thousands of miles and filled thousands of water stations in the borderlands for humane borders. Jay holds a BA in history from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He was a Peace Corps fellow at the University of Arizona, where he earned his Master of Science in Planning. He enjoys remodeling houses. He loves to play tennis and travels, and he's married to his wife, Randy Olson, who they met at the U of A Planning degree program. Jay, welcome to our forum today.
Thank you so much, Ernesto, and to Mayor Romero and Director Morales for inviting me. It is truly an honor to be here. You know, it just says a lot about the leadership of the Mayor and Director Morales that we're having a fair housing panel today and are addressing the needs of fair housing throughout Tucson and Pima County. Often fair housing has been left out of the conversation, but it is critically important, as the mayor alluded to, as did Director Morales. You know, all of the things that we're talking about are interconnected, and people need to have access to safe, decent, affordable housing. And for too long, whether you're were white or Hispanic or Black or had a disability, number of different protected classes really limited people's ability to become homeowners and build the wealth that Director Morales talked about. So I'm, again, very honored to be here and get into these issues. Happy Fair Housing Month. The theme of Fair Housing Month this year is fair housing, more than just words. And I think that though we are talking a lot about fair housing today, obviously as a panel, the city of Tucson is taking action and it's more than just words with the city of Tucson in terms of moving fair housing forward. I am the director of the Southwest Fair Housing Council. We are based here in Tucson, although we've moved to a virtual environment, so I don't know exactly where we're based, maybe in cyberspace these days, but we do serve the entire state of Arizona with fair housing services. We can help people that have experienced illegal housing discrimination by conducting investigations and helping them move their fair housing complaint forward and seek the justice that they need and deserve. And we also provide education and outreach free of charge, both trainings, we attend events, things like that, really anything that we can do to get the word out about fair housing. So again, thank you so much for inviting me. It's definitely an honor to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Jay. And do look for Jay's op-ed in the coming days in the Arizona Daily Star. To Mayor Romero, question, why is fair housing such an important issue for you? And how did the pandemic, which affected all of us, but how did it inform you? How did it shape the way you directed the city's response to housing during the pandemic?
Thank you, Ernesto. First and most importantly, I want to say hello to our friends in the South Tucson Housing Authority who are watching diligently during their lunchtime. Thank you so much for spending your lunchtime with us and for caring about housing our South Tucson neighbors and friends. Well, I know a few things. I know, because my parents taught me this, that what people need in life to survive and thrive are a couple of things. A stable home, a stable roof over their head, clean air, clean water, and food. And so I see access to housing and fair housing and clean housing and affordable housing as something that is absolutely primary and necessary for people to be able to thrive. And so that's why I believe in the housing first model so much, not only because it's a proven method that works, but because just being able to have someone in clean, affordable housing stabilizes. And there's research. It's not just us politicians or the Department Director of Housing Community Development saying this. There's research that proves that being able to provide stable housing for children, for adults, is a stabilizing. It's good for, as Director Morales said, it's good for children and their educational careers. It's for adults and being able to find that stability to provide their families or themselves. And so for me during the pandemic, what I learned is, like I said before, that the social inequities that we have seen being built throughout the last century in this country, that hurts the frontline communities, the most vulnerable communities of our society, which are seniors and children in low-income communities, and also Black, Indigenous, and communities of color, because of different laws, by the way, because of different laws and racist policies that were instituted before, they were highlighted during the pandemic. The wonderful thing about, if you could see a silver lining, is that we saw this so clearly, and that the federal government stepped up immediately to send funds to cities like Tucson. And what I and my colleagues on the council decided to do with these funds immediately was to put that federal funds back into the hands of working families, of people that were suffering, and small businesses and families to provide, rental assistance. But the city of Tucson also jumped into head first, dived into the concept of housing first. And we realized quickly that people losing their homes was not going to be good for the pandemic because of the spread, that our houseless folk couldn't be put into shelters because of the spread, and we couldn't leave them just out and about because of the spread. So we used federal funds and operated a housing first approach and started housing people in local hotels, which, by the way, helped the hotels because the hotel industry was suffering as well. And so through the leadership of Les Morales at the Housing Community Development Department, we put these CARES funds to work immediately and housed more than 945 heads of households, 1,268 individuals. And of these, 300 of them were placed in permanent housing. So we immediately started working to put people into housing first at the hotels, provided them warm meals. And because it worked, that it stabilized people. As a result, out of 1,268 individuals, 300 of them today have permanent housing. And so it really opened my eyes into how quickly we could move and partner with our nonprofit communities to put these funds out. And Congressman said a little bit about it as well, but the partnership with Pima County in acting quickly, we already had a system here in Tucson and Pima County. And we already had a good partnership, the City of Tucson Housing Community Development with the Pima County Department of Housing Community Development, I think it's also. We already had a system, and so we already had a partnership. And in order to provide federal funds into families and help them with their rent and mortgage so that we wouldn't see more families become homeless, we are leading in the country. Not just in Arizona, we are leading in the country in how quickly we distribute those funds to help people pay for their mortgage and their rent, and so that they won't be evicted from their home.
Thank you, Mayor. And this is a good segue to ask Director Morales to talk about some of the ways that Department of Housing and Development has ensured fair housing in our community, but also more specifically, trends and how we are working, HCD is working with marginalized communities, houseless, people with physical challenges, and other marginalized communities. Thank you, Director.
Thank you. Again, as I'm managing these housing programs in which we're working with our landlords, who we greatly appreciate, and couldn't do this program without our landlords, and understanding what our participants are dealing with on a daily basis. And one of the processes we have is called a reasonable accommodation process. So whether it's our units that we own and manage, or working with our clients who are in their private market rental, one of the things that I think is really important to highlight is the need for those who are disabled, persons with disabilities, and what a major issue it is when we're talking about fair housing, when we're talking about the housing programs that we deal with in our department. HUD has reported that more than 60% of fair housing complaints are related to issues of disability. And we know that poverty is also overrepresented for persons of color. And those impacts of whether it's persons of color, poverty, persons with disabilities, those are the marginalized or the most impacted to both fair housing and the shortage, the severe shortage of housing. And I just want to touch on for just a moment about what that looks like for these for these populations. For example, when someone needs a reasonable accommodation, that's asking that whether the landlord make changes to the unit or to their policies, or even for our programs, our policies, our rules, how can we ensure access for them so that they can fully enjoy and participate in their housing, and to mitigate those barriers that the rest of us that are not persons with disabilities don't have to deal with. Some of the examples of discrimination that happens is around enforcing a blanket no pets policy as a reason to not allow service animals, refusing approved reasonable modifications like a ramp for wheelchair access, or offering differences in treatment or of housing terms and conditions based on disability, such as requiring a higher security deposit because of perceived damages or because they have a service animal, or refusing to communicate housing information. And so those are things that we have seen and we've heard, and had published a report in 2017 in which they looked at rental housing discrimination on the basis of mental disabilities for people who have psychiatric issues, intellectual or developmental disabilities. And what they found is significant bias, stigmatizing reactions and attitudes. These are troubling things, and we want to help our disability community to understand what they can do to address those discriminating behaviors. On top of that, there was a report in 2017 called Priced Out from the Technical Assistance Collaboration. And what they found is that people with disabilities live in poverty at more than twice the rate of people without disabilities and are less likely to afford apartment or other housing. People of color, including those with disabilities, are most likely to be extremely low income renters. When you just look at supplemental security income, SSI, nearly 5 million adults receive that income, and it's a very low, they are at extreme poverty with just receiving SSI. What we know about our subsidized housing programs is they're not enough to meet the need of those who need it. In fact, 75% of households who are eligible are not receiving assistance. And we know our wait lists are often long. Here in Tucson, Pima County, we've had our wait list closed for many years. We're about to open it, hopefully this summer. So that's an announcement that we will be sharing and ensuring significant outreach for our communities of persons with disabilities, persons with limited English. We will do an extensive outreach because we want to ensure equal access for all persons to be able to get to our housing wait list. But we know COVID-19, as the mayor has already talked about, further exacerbated this. And as a result, we've seen increases with our homeless population, persons experiencing homelessness. There was a report this morning by our Tucson Pima Collaboration and Homelessness that it's somewhere between 25 and 95% increase in homelessness of unsheltered persons. It's a staggering number. And we know that this has been exacerbated because of the pandemic. All of these factors have made a long-standing crisis, our housing crisis, even more dire. And so the more we can do to alleviate those things, and now I will share what we're doing as a department to alleviate and try to address this severe shortage of housing. Mayor and council asked that we provide a comprehensive strategy on how to address and how to create more units. And that plan was adopted this year. It's called the Housing Affordability Strategy for Tucson, the HAST plan. And that outlines 10 initiatives, 10 policies on how we're going to address and help spur more creation of units and also preservation of units. Around preservation for us, it's really important around low-income homeowners and what they have to deal with when they don't have enough income to repair their homes, or we have persons where their families have changed and now they need their home to be more accessible. We have programs in which we're able to fund those things, and those are programs that have been long-standing, but not always accessible or known to our community. So getting the education to make sure people are aware of that. We also have a strong emphasis on development, both how to develop capacity in our community with other developers, how do we get developers more incentives? That's part of our HAS plan. The mayor and council passed accessory dwelling unit ordinance so that we can increase units for those households, again, who have changes, aging parents or children that can't afford to go live on their own, to be able to build an additional unit on their property, provides those opportunities. We also, in addition to the development capacity internally as a city, the Housing Community Development Department, we want to return to developing housing. At one time, Housing Community Development did some amazing projects. It's been a few years. We're going to do it again. We've created a nonprofit arm, and we are actively developing and working with co-developers to help us build more units, because it will take many of us to do that. And so we want to support our affordable housing developers, but we also want to build that capacity here within our department. And finally, mayor and council, through the local American Rescue Plan, has committed significant funds to housing community development to go acquire and purchase property for future development. And so these are some of the things in our HAS plan. There's many more actionable goals that are outlined, but that just gives you a teaser as far as some of the things that we're working on. And with more units, and then again around education, that's a part of our HAS plan. Education around housing, how to do around fair housing, where Jay Young and the Southwest Fair Housing Council has been very instrumental in helping us get education and addressing those issues. So Neto, I probably talked too long, but
No, you're fine.
that does, I think, hit some of the high points of what we're doing.
Well, thank you. And again, it's so important to hear and share with the community what HCD is doing. At the Southwest Fair Housing Council, Jay Young has seen life a little differently, but with tremendous challenges and issues. Jay, what are some of the systematic challenges that you see at the community level, and how is your organization addressing these challenges?
Yeah, thanks, Ernesto. It's a really great question. And, I think a lot of the challenges that we see from a fair housing perspective really have to do with the history of housing discrimination in this country and in Tucson. And I would like to highlight a little bit of that history, because I think, unfortunately, it's still not known to most folks, but it's critical to understand if we're going to make progress on a lot of the areas that we're talking about today. So, after World War II, the federal government basically created the modern housing industry that we know today. The federal government backed and financed the construction of the suburbs. The federal government created the 30-year mortgage that we all know and love today that helps people buy homes. That didn't exist before World War II. And throughout this process, after World War II, minority and integrated neighborhoods were destroyed by government programs. Often highways were built through these neighborhoods, really destroying the fabric. And I think that's still felt today as well. And I think the main takeaway of this is that while it was a great wealth building program for lots of people in this country, it explicitly excluded people of color. It was basically for white folks. And I don't think that story is told enough today. It wasn't only the federal government, but the real estate industry and the banking industry was in full support of this. The Realtor Code of Ethics for a long time required their members to discriminate. They couldn't sell homes in white neighborhoods to Black folks, or Black folks in white neighborhoods, and basically to keep races separated. So if you were going to buy a home, they were not showing you houses in integrated neighborhoods or neighborhoods of color if you were white, and vice versa. And that still goes on today as well. Just developers in Tucson used restrictive covenants to make it illegal to sell homes to people of color in white neighborhoods. And you can still see in deeds today of homes in Tucson neighborhoods where those covenants are there. They're obviously illegal today, but you can see that history still today. So the housing segregation that we have today was carefully, intentionally, and forcefully engineered by all sectors of society, starting with the government on through the private sector. And these patterns are still very clear in Tucson today. We've done mapping, and now it's easy to go online and look at maps that show just how segregated we still are in this community. The newer suburbs, Oro Valley, the foothills, very white. South Tucson, south of 22nd Street, kind of up through the urban core, still very segregated, high minority concentration. So we're still living with this legacy. And I think it's important to talk about how that legacy does actually live on in concrete terms today. So in Tucson and in the United States, white folks are much more likely to own their homes. In fact, the home ownership rate for African Americans is lower than it was 54 years ago when the Fair Housing Act was passed. The home ownership gap in Tucson between whites and blacks is 34%. Between whites and Hispanics, it's 12%. So there's still a large home ownership gap. Just as recently as 2018, a study by the investigative journalism firm Reveal showed that people of color are still 2 to 3 times more likely to be denied a mortgage as similarly situated white people. So people with similar financial profiles are simply being denied mortgages because of the color of their skin. This is today. This is not, 54 years ago before the passage of the Fair Housing Act. We're looking at, particularly on the national level of the National Fair Housing Alliance, appraisal bias. So homes in neighborhoods of color appraising for tens of thousands of dollars less than similar homes in majority white areas. And this robs people of color of significant wealth to the tune of $150 billion in terms of value of homes. And I think the statistic that always jumps out to me that really illustrates this is median wealth. So white families, the median wealth today is $188,000. For Black families, it's only $24,000. And for Hispanic families, it's only $36,000. And I think you can really tie this yawning wealth gap to the history of discrimination and racism in our housing policies. So again, I think that we need to tell that story. We need to understand the history of our housing policy and the racism that was built in. And frankly, we've not done a whole lot over the years to actually and actively address that. So how does that show up today? There are still continued fair housing threats. Lending discrimination is still a big issue, as I mentioned. So lenders are still not lending equally in violation of the Fair Housing Act based on the color of your skin or your ethnicity. Again, I mentioned appraisal bias that is robbing neighborhoods of color in particular of billions of dollars of wealth. Again, I think it was mentioned as well, there are blanket bans at apartment complexes throughout Tucson, throughout the state, that say we will not accept anybody that has any kind of criminal background. Again, that is contrary to HUD guidance and keeps folks out of housing that need a second chance to have access to housing. 2 more things I would mention: the eviction crisis. It was bad before COVID-19. It went down a little bit because there were policies in place that prevented people from being evicted. Well, those rates are going back up. And again, when you look at home ownership rates and who's renting, again, it's affecting communities of color considerably more than white communities. And then COVID-19 that we've already talked about, significant damage to communities of color and other vulnerable populations in particular. And we're just starting to rebuild from that. So it's something else that from a fair housing perspective that we really need to pay attention to. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Ernesto. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. As mentioned, Jay is a member of the Commission on Equitable Housing Development. Question to the panelists: how do you see the commission informing mayor and council on strategic plans for equitable and affordable housing? Anyone want to?
So I will share that. The commission has done a lot of great work. One of the things they did this past year is create subcommittees. And one of those is around segregation. And Jay Young has been chairing that committee and really trying to understand the impact. And Jay, you could speak better to this than I can, but also what can we do to help address some of those longstanding generational impacts.
What I can add about the Equitable Housing and Development Commission is that the city of Tucson used to have a Metropolitan Housing Commission that for many years didn't meet. And as many of you know, I sat on the council for about 12 years. And the last 3 years that I occupied my seat as a council member, I started seeing this concern that we're now seeing full blown, right? The concern of many people not being able to afford even rent. And saw the concern of displacement and gentrification in our city. And I didn't want the city of Tucson to continue moving ahead at the pace that we were moving on without having a functioning group of citizens and knowledgeable people like Jay. And Jay sits in this housing, Equitable Housing and Development Commission. And we created, I pushed on, and my colleagues on the council and the mayor at the moment, we created an anti-displacement task force. I think it must have been in 2018 or 2017. I'm not recalling very well. I think it was 2018. And when I became mayor, I felt as though we had to merge the Housing Commission, Metropolitan Housing Commission, this anti-displacement task force and create a brand new task force. Just start from scratch and then have the citizens appointed to that commission lead us into what we needed to work on. And it's been pretty amazing. It was back in January 7th of 2020 that mayor and council voted on. I brought the item to the table. I believe Councilmember Santa Cruz was a signer to that memo. We brought it to the mayor and council in January 7th of 2020, before the pandemic hit us. We created this new commission, and it has really a breadth of experiences on that commission that has been incredibly important. And as Liz had mentioned, there's 3 subcommittees that have been created. One of them is the Affordable Housing Subcommittee, which provided a lot of feedback and input on our HAST plan, which is our housing affordability strategy for Tucson. The other subcommittee is Permanent Supportive Housing Subcommittee. And then the third committee is the Housing Segregation Subcommittee. It's an incredible group of people with different experiences that they all bring to the table. And it really has given a lot of feedback and input. And there's still so much to do on behalf of that commission. So that's what I wanted to add, the context of how it was created. I think it is important to talk about.
Thank you, Mayor. Jay, do you have a comment about the commission that you sit on?
I do. First of all, I just want to thank Mayor Romero for her leadership in bringing equity to the forefront and creating this commission and naming equity in the commission title. I mean, that is important in and of itself, and Director Morales as well for shepherding the commission along the way and being such a strong advocate. But again, I think just reframing housing and how we're looking at it through an equity lens is a huge change and is really forcing us to look at a lot of the things that we've been talking about today in a way that really needed to happen. And it's been great being on the commission, working with a diverse group of knowledgeable advocates, really, who bring many different perspectives around housing to the table. And I think one of the things that, I mean, it seems obvious, but I think it's worth saying is that housing is incredibly complex, right? And I think as we dig into it on the commission, we realize there's, stuff coming from the federal government, there's local ordinances and issues, there's stuff happening at the state level, and they're all coming together to impact housing in our community in Tucson, and working to peel those layers back and figure out how we can, particularly at the local level, make it easier to build affordable housing, I think has just been such a critical step in providing access to more folks. And again, affordable housing isn't fair housing, but obviously there's a very close link. And when we're talking about equity in housing, the link to fair housing is so strong. And so, again, as a fair housing advocate and housing advocate in general, having that equity lens and having fair housing be a part of the conversation, I think is a wonderful step forward. So again, thank you for the leadership of Mayor Romero and Director Morales.
Thank you, panelists. There are a few questions in the chat box that I'd like to get to. First up, I'd like to ask Liz a question about, as the number of individuals who are formerly houseless are moved into city-supported shelters. Could you also talk about a little bit about these wraparound services that the city is providing these individuals?
Right. So typically, typical property management, you don't have a service coordinator. And what we did, one of the things we have had in our public housing historically is a resident coordinator to help support people, especially those who are older adults and persons with disabilities. But when we started moving some of those from our hotel program that the mayor talked about into Tucson House, as an example, and other sites, we did bring in additional staff to create those partnerships and wraparound services. And we've seen a tremendous amount of stability with those residents that we have moved into those sites because of those additional supports. But we have worked closely with ASU, School of Social Work, and we also have worked with Compass Affordable Housing. They are providing on-site services to our residents. Through the pandemic, we brought meals with Pima County Council on Aging, with the CARES funds that they received. So we've been able to do a tremendous amount of support services at Tucson House and many of our other sites.
Thank you. Mayor, there are a number of questions related to the surging rent prices here in Tucson. And Tucson is not isolated, it's across the country. The questions revolve around what avenue or avenues does the city have in addressing the surging rent prices? What its hands are tied in some aspects. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, I can elaborate. The mayor and council, through our housing affordability strategy, have had discussions in terms of trying to put forward ordinances that would outlaw discrimination against housing vouchers. There's obviously a lot of pushback from the multifamily association, in other words, landlords, against that, which, by the way, Tucson is only trying to say, hey, you cannot discriminate a person based on how they're going to pay their rent. The state of Arizona, the state legislature, has many laws in place that preempt cities like Tucson, Arizona from doing housing rental caps, which other states like California and New York, the state allows for cities and towns to do that. Actually, as a matter of fact, California has a law that statewide that blocks multi-housing developers and landlords from like rent gouging. The state legislature here in Arizona prevents cities from being able to put ordinances together from disallowing price gouging or rental gouging here in Arizona. So many of the issues that other states can do, the city of Tucson cannot, because the Arizona state legislature preempts us from being able to create our own ordinances in terms of affordable housing.
Mayor, if I can piggyback with a follow-up question related to what the city can or cannot do. Does the state preempt the city, for example, in legislating the number of rental units bought by out-of-town investors for Airbnb, for example?
No, many towns, actually, resort towns like Sedona and other resort towns, their mayors and councils are actually lobbying very hard the state legislature from untying our hands as local jurisdictions to be able to pass ordinances that could regulate some of that because smaller resort towns experience that at a greater pace. Like a lot of people, investors purchase homes to create Airbnbs. And then there's a severely high lack of affordability for workers in those resort towns. So it's becoming a huge issue in more rural communities. And because it is a bipartisan solution, I think that's progressing a little bit better in the state legislature. But no, the cities have our hands tied when it comes to regulating investors from purchasing homes and creating Airbnbs in them.
Thank you, Mayor. Let's finish this discussion with one question. I'll direct it to Jay. There's a question in the chat, Jay, relative to how individuals in the community can be proactive, how they can advocate for affordable housing solutions. As an activist yourself, what are your suggestions for residents of Tucson to become more active?
Well, as I mentioned before, housing is such a complex issue with so many different facets and so many different levels. I think one of the things that I would say is we need more action at the federal level. I mean, I would go so far as to argue we don't really have much of a federal housing policy, and I think it makes it hard for local jurisdictions then to produce or be involved in creating more affordable housing. So I think definitely advocacy at the federal level, talking to our elected representatives about housing. It's often forgotten, and when Build Back Better in particular was kind of on the table, it was one of the first things that was on the chopping block. So housing is often neglected, and I would say at a local level as well, just advocating and speaking up for more housing. Obviously you can support the Southwest Fair Housing Council. We're always looking for testers to help ferret out discrimination, but just learning more and being active. And again, I think understanding the history of how we got here, because I think if we don't understand the history of housing discrimination and the racist housing policies, it makes it difficult to see the solutions that may need to take place. Because I think if we don't understand that, we just don't kind of conceptualize what needs to be done and kind of the efforts that need to be taken to address the fair housing needs that are still very much apparent today.
Thank you, Jay. And I'll just add, for advocates, contact your city ward representatives, your state representatives, the governor's office, and as Jay mentioned, federal officials, and stay in touch with the Housing Community Development Department. Look it up our website and be engaged. And so with that, I'd like to thank Mayor Regina Romero, HCD Director Liz Morales, and Jay Young from the Southwest Fair Housing Council for participating in today's virtual town hall. And yes, and read.
And I just want to share this. This is your book of the month, The Color of Law. I know it's backwards on the camera, but it's a book written by Richard Rothstein. And so I highly encourage this for your fair housing education about the impacts of federal policies, state and local policies that Jay had referenced. And I also want to just thank those. I know we have Tucson Association of Realtors represented and AMA on this meeting. our landlords and real estate agents go through extremely a lot of training and education on fair housing. And I want to thank our landlords and real estate agents for the work they do to ensure that that happens. So just wanted to say that last comment.
Appreciate it.
Thank
Thank you. Thank you again, everyone. And thank you for your participation. This recording will be on our website next week. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.